So here we go. So Luke, the theme of Luke really starts to take off in chapter 4. Jesus is preaching a sermon, and when he preaches this sermon, it ticks people off so much that they try to kill him. So obviously it's like, what did he say, right? Like, what could you possibly say that would be so infuriating that people want you dead? So this is what Jesus said. Verse 18, I'm just going to summarize it and read 2 bits of it. In verse 18, Jesus says this. He's quoting from Isaiah here as well. The Spirit of the Lord is upon me, because he anointed me to preach the gospel to the poor. He has sent me to proclaim release to the captives and recovery of sight to the blind, to set free those who are oppressed, and to proclaim the favorable year of the Lord. So Jesus is basically announcing his mission here, right? He's telling people, like, this is why I'm here. This is what I'm going to do. And the people in the audience, if you read the whole chapter there, the whole story in chapter 4, the people in the audience don't seem to really get what he's trying to say. So Jesus decides to make it dummy-proof for them. And that's when they try and kill him. All right, so here's what he says. This is Jesus making it dummy-proof for the people. In verse 25, he says, certainly there were lots of needy widows in Israel during Elijah's time. The heavens were closed for 3.5 years, and there was this severe famine that devastated the land. But God didn't send Elijah to any of the needy widows in Israel. Instead, he sent Elijah to a foreigner, to a widow in the land of Sidon, or Sidon, I don't know, one of those. And he continues, and he says, and many in Israel had leprosy in the time of Elisha, but the only one healed was Naaman, and he wasn't Israelite, he was a Syrian. As soon as Jesus said this, people freaked out. And you read there in chapter 4, they tried to drag him outside and kill him. Now you got to kind of sit back and be like, okay, well that still doesn't sound like that serious, right? Like, it doesn't sound like you're worthy of death for saying this. But when you follow the book of Luke, it starts to come alive why this ticked people off so much. Jesus survives this assassination attempt. And he begins to do exactly what he said he was there to do. He starts delivering captives, he starts delivering outcasts, he starts connecting with the nobodies in society. He heals a demon-possessed man, he heals Peter's mother-in-law, he heals a leper, he heals a paralyzed man, the guy who was lowered into his house through the roof. If you follow the book of Luke, these stories go back to back from each other. And there's a point behind these stories. Because what Jesus is doing, as he's healing and he's working and he's gathering all these people, is he's not helping the elites of Israel. He's not helping the religious elites. He's helping the nobodies. He's welcoming the nobodies. He's welcoming the outcasts. And to top it all off, he calls a tax collector, stories right there in the book of Luke, a tax collector named Levi, to be one of his followers. Tax collectors were considered traitors in Israel because they worked for Rome. So then comes the next bit of the story that kind of brings what happened in chapter 4 a little bit more to light. This tax collector, his name was Levi, he throws a party. And here's what it says. The Pharisees came to the party, and they saw Jesus at this party, at Levi's house, right? The scum of the earth, this traitor. And there at the party are all the outcasts, all the misfits, all the people who can't walk into synagogue, all the people that the religious elites are like, you don't belong. That's who's at this party. And this is what happens. Verse 30. The Pharisees and the teachers of religious law complained bitterly to Jesus' disciples, why does your teacher eat and drink with such scum? Dang. And then Jesus answered them, healthy people don't need a doctor. Only sick people do. I have come to call not those who think they are righteous, but those who know they are sinners. and need to repent. So I want you to notice what Jesus says here. He's like, I haven't come to call the healthy, but the sick. And this is the thing that he was saying in the synagogue. He's like, the Lord has sent me. He's anointed me to do this thing, to liberate the oppressed, the captives, to heal, to bind up the brokenhearted. And when he explains it to the people, he explains it by telling them stories of instances in Israel's history where God acted, but he didn't act on behalf of the people who were considered insiders. He acted on behalf of people who were considered outsiders, pagans, the lost. Now, this is what Jesus is doing. He's basically saying, I'm here for the outcast. I'm here for the misfit. I'm here for the person who doesn't fit in. And maybe to make it feel a little bit more realistic, it would be like Jesus walking by any of our churches today, and we're like, oh, Jesus, come on in. And he's like, oh, actually, I'm not here for you. I'm on my way to the rehab house. I'm on my way to the battered shelter. I'm on my way to the red light district. That's what Jesus is communicating to the religious community. And if you think this is uncomfortable, it gets worse. And I'm going to close with this. You have to see this through Jewish eyes to appreciate how offensive what Jesus is doing is. Because it's so offensive, you guys. You have to see this through Jewish eyes. Jesus is gathering all the outcasts and all the misfits. And then he calls 12 disciples. And you follow the story in Luke. Immediately after he calls his 12 disciples, he climbs up this mountain and he preaches the Sermon on the Mount, which is basically a manifesto for the kingdom of heaven. Now, if you notice this, you got to see this through Jewish eyes, because if you see this through Jewish eyes, this is basically what's happening. Jesus is liberating the captives. He said he was going to liberate. Then he appoints 12 apostles, and then he climbs a mountain and gives the kingdom manifesto. To the Jewish mind, Jesus is reenacting the book of Exodus. He liberates the captives who leave Egypt under the 12 tribes of Israel, and he leads them to Mount Sinai, where he gives the law. But now in the New Testament, he's liberating the captives of sin. He's placing them under 12 apostles, and then he climbs a mountain and proclaims the way of the kingdom. Now, this is why what Jesus is doing is so offensive. The Jews understand this. Jesus is suggesting, this is what he's insinuating with all this crazy stuff he's doing. Jesus is basically creating a new Israel. He's creating a new kingdom, and the religious elites, they're not invited. They didn't want to kill this guy for nothing, right? Like, they're not invited. I mean, the door's open, but they kind of disinvite themselves because of their arrogance, right? So if you follow the story of Luke, and I'm not going to say much more because, it'll turn into a sermon. But if you follow the story of Luke, this theme continues to repeat and repeat and repeat. After the Sermon on the Mount, for example, Jesus heals a centurion's servant. And what does he say about this Roman centurion? I haven't seen faith like this in all of Israel. Whoa, that's offensive. He's like, the outsider is a part of this community, and the insiders are not. And then you have stories like the Good Samaritan, also in Luke. It's like, who's the good guy in the story? It's the outsider. It's the person that people considered scum of the earth. And it goes on and on and on and on. In chapter 14, Jesus tells a story about a wedding invitation. And the first people who are invited to the wedding are the elites. And they all decline the invitation. And this is how the story ends in verse 21. The master of the feast says to his servants, go out quickly into the streets and alleys of the town and bring in the poor, bring the crippled, bring the blind and the lame. I tell you, not one of those who were invited will get a taste of my banquet. So he opens it up for the misfits. And this keeps happening over and over. Jesus liberating captives, and he's creating a new Israel, and he's doing it through them. And the elites are not included. It's the people who don't fit in. It's the people who don't go to church. It's the people who don't dress holy and talk holy. It's for them. That's who the new Israel is for. And as I read this and I wrestle with this idea in the book of Luke, I can't help but wonder, how can I be a part of a community that follows that same exact vision? So when I think about what do I want to see in the church? What do I want to be a part of nurturing in the church? I think of exactly what Jesus was doing. A community a space, a table for the misfit, a table for those who don't belong, a table for those who don't fit the script. That's what I dream of. That's what I imagine.